Welcome to video lecture 5, the first lecture of this 2 approximately 30-minute class lectures related to St. Thomas's teaching on the One and the Many, and how in this lecture the generic subject of philosophy or science is properly divided into species, and how this division affects the more general divisions of philosophy into speculative science and scientific or philosophical predication. This chapter, or this lecture, and the lecture we just had on analogy are probably the most complicated ones that we'll go over in what we'll be talking about in this course. And nothing is, once again, extremely difficult in either one of them, other than the jargon that is used. So don't worry about it too much. You'll become used to that as we continue to use the terms in the course. In the discussion I was engaging in related to predication, the way we use terms, refer them to subjects, I had mentioned that predication deals with ways of expressing unity, relating, unity, and this is chiefly what logical reasoning and scientific reasoning, philosophical reasoning relate to. Anytime that we're making a judgment, in a sense what we're doing is referring a modality of unity existing between, or not existing, between a subject and what is said of it. That what is said of it either in no way is one with it, or in what way it's one with it. And the philosophers and scientists are chiefly concerned about that. The different modalities of unity that can be expressed by analogy. If you recall, I went over 3 implications in the video lecture 4, about the difference between the logical genus and the scientific and philosophical genus, and how the philosophical genus can't really exist, the philosophical subject can't exist without an understanding of the reality of aims. And I also talked about how this philosophical subject also required faculties. It has to be referred to human faculties, to faculties of soul, in order to express how this can be scientific, because science is a knowledge, and the thing known and the knower comprise in some way a unity that constitutes science. Science is a personally caused act. If you don't relate the organization known to the knower and the way the knower apprehends this organization, you can't possibly have science. I also indicated that St. Thomas's teaching can't be understood without understanding his teaching about opposition and virtual quantity. Now, that notion of virtual quantity becomes very important with today's topic as division into species, division of a genus into species. And I'll get into that a little bit today and in subsequent lectures. I just wanted to review the other elements, topics we went over in video lecture 4 that Once again, analogy being the proper way of talking for philosophers and sciences, and univocity being the proper mode of talking for logicians. And then I went into a more precise understanding of what St. Thomas means by analogy and predication. I want to go into a little more about the difference between a scientific or philosophical genus and a logical genus, so that you can get an understanding of precisely what stimulates philosophical wonder in the mind of someone like St. Thomas and Aristotle. They're not exactly identical, but they do share a generic commonality in this. St. Thomas changes Aristotle's definition of a human being. As a Christian, he has to. That changes the understanding of philosophy and of science. So why? Because it's an act of the human person. And disagreements about the nature of science always essentially involve disagreements about the nature of a human being, as do all divisions of science and art and so on. They're ultimately they all in some way involve disagreements about what people are and how people cause acts that are called scientific or artistic. The first of there are 7 topics I'm going to go over in this lecture, and the first of them has to do with how St. Thomas divides the generic subject of philosophy. I mentioned this to some extent previously, and I made reference to checking out St. Thomas's teaching on angels related to this. And that has an analogy with respect to human beings, because St. Thomas talks about angelic natures being specifically divided on the basis of the way in which the kind of unity, the superior unity that the higher angelic nature has or possesses in being able to exercise acts, so that in a much more simple and what we would call today concentrated act, it's of intelligence, it's able to know a greater number of things, and things that are intensely more difficult. Now, we make the same sort of distinction, specific distinction among human beings with respect to their intelligence. The person who is more intelligent is the person who is able to understand more things and more difficult things with fewer intellectual acts. The less mental exertion of effort you have to go into, you have to exercise in order to know a greater number of things, especially of things of a greater intellectual difficulty to penetrate, the more intelligent a person is. So what St. Thomas is doing is basically dividing species on the basis of the reception within a power or a potency, a qualified potency, what he would call a determinate potency, one which is not just indefinite in reception, but is qualified to receive a certain type of organization or a certain limit of organization. So St. Thomas repeatedly in Aristotle says that potency divides act. And in dividing act, it also divides unity. Right? And in dividing unity, it also divides aim. When you're dealing with causes, especially, this is crucial to understand. Because, once again, a cause is distinct from a principle in that what it does is replicate within the receiver a likeness, an imitation of the cause. And since causes act, that likeness that is generated within the receiver of a cause, especially a knowing receiver, is received as in terms of a desire to act. In non-intelligent beings, there's something that resembles that desire to act, namely a persistence on the part of a being that contains a nature, its own intrinsic principles of operation, to resist any obstacle that prevents it from satisfying its natural desire. What's called, we even use the analogy, natural desire. Its natural inclination to cooperate, its activities to generate a cooperative act, which is the end or the aim. Once again, the end or an aim is not something mysterious. It's a corporate act, an organizational act. It's not performed by one being isolated from other beings. It's performed by a whole, by cooperation of the parts. In fact, the organizational aim is something that is internal to those parts as a kind of communication relationship. It's contained within them from the very beginnings of an organization. But the distribution of the unity of an organization comes from the unequal distribution of the aim, which is most completely distributed in the highest member of the species, namely the leader, the organizational leader, a CEO or a commanding general, who is able to maintain the relationship among the other parts of an organization to the organizational aim. And when that is broken, that relationship among a nominal leader or the real leader, they might not coincide, then the organization tends to fall apart. So Republican governments, for example, are always one generation away from despotism, or one leader, I should say, not even a generation. One political leader can cause you to fall from being a something resembling a republic into something that is more of a totalitarian type of a government. The unity of the genus, in the way it is unequally distributed according to perfection of possession or privation, receptivity and resistance, which divide the genus, and grow out of the organization. Right? This is especially evident in living organizations, beings that grow out of, like plants, that grow out of seeds. That the organization into parts has extremes of a weakest and a strongest part. Military organizations have a weakest part, and those that are least possessed of membership, you might say, in the military, the privates, the people who've just come in and know virtually nothing about the organization, but are qualified, hopefully, to become members of it. Or with respect to any new organization, the initial members. Aristotle talks about this in the Politics, how we predicate citizenship of different people unequally, and strictly speaking, it's most properly said of those who in some way are able to exercise administrative activity. Those who hold public offices are the most completely citizen. So that not everybody who lives in a country or lives in a geographical region is a citizen, or not even someone who is nominally granted citizenship and has a right to vote. But those people are most completely citizens who are able to exert political influence and resist taking political direction because of some ability to participate in the administration, the execution, the division of labor, as you might say. This is why I made reference to Adam Smith and his teaching about the division of labor, which in some way he has recognized, knowingly or not, maybe through some sort of scholastic influence on his thinking, I don't know, is the way in which species become distributed. Species do not come into existence as a result of historical descent from common ancestors, because that's really the notion of a race. If that were the case with respect to species, then the original members of a species couldn't belong to it. They'd always have to be something that doesn't be, that's a kind of missing link to some other being that does not have the specific difference. The genus is always the cause of the species, and it's the cause of the species by generating its organizational unity unequally through extremes, a multitude of extremes, and this unequal distribution is due to an unequal or less than complete, a somewhat privated or deprived possession on the part of a potency of this maturely or completely developed act. That's the principle of virtual quantity in St. Thomas. It's a quality that is contained within a potentiality that limits the reception of an act of existence or an operation or a unity or even a relationship. So that the genus is divided on the basis into species on the basis of that organizational aim which exists in the beginning through the cause that is generating its likeness in the members of the species. This being part of a whole. A multitude only becomes part of a whole, as Etienne Gilson observed, to the extent that it is ordered, and that is to the extent that there's an organization. That's the only way we can unify a multitude, to make it one, by making it a whole. And the only way you can construct a whole or possess a whole is to the extent that this multitude has a common and unequal relationship to cooperating vis-a-vis one act. So that the act that is being distributed throughout the multitude is in the form of a likeness to its cause, generates within the multitude a singularity of purpose, a singularity of mind and desire and hope, to act like its cause, to become a cause, to cause like its causes. So there's no way, as far as I can see, that you can distribute a genus into parts without having the division of organizational unity and organizational aim. And the more completely and fully possessed a being is within an organization, understanding that organizational aim and organizational unity, the more properly speaking that person belongs to the organization, possesses the generic characteristic that belongs to the species, and manifests a perfection of operation, of simplicity and unity, that gives it a kind of internal liberty that lower beings in this hierarchy don't possess. So science is always hierarchical. the notion that a hierarchy of sciences do not exist is nonsensical. Aristotle points this out with respect to the difference between in practical and productive sciences, about how sciences that have an aim of use are govern or determine the nature of sciences that produce, like manufacturing. So a manufacturing organization depends upon how a human being desires to put something into practice. For example, the example Aristotle gives is the art of sailing governs the art of shipbuilding. How you manufacture ships is going to depend upon what people understand by sailing. Putting human activity to use. And that has a relationship to the way in which primary industries are determined, because the manufacturing industry is going to depend upon industries that get natural resources as the instruments by means of which you can engage in the act of sailing. If you can't get the materials and you can't get them to the site and so on, this whole organization of scientific activity breaks apart. So the reality of aims and the distribution of aims through this multitude is indicative of the fact that science and philosophy are hierarchically ordered, and then the species are divided according to a hierarchy of possession of simplicity of unity in relationship to the kind of organization that one is involved in, and that the species belongs to, and the aim that is being distributed, and the extent to which the higher species communicates internally the aim, right? And is able to assist lower species to do the same. This inequality among the members of the species indicates why St. Thomas and Aristotle maintained that per se, it's one of the reasons that they indicated that per se predication is essential to science. That scientific talk involves talk about a multitude of beings that have some sort of necessary connection to a chief subject, that a chief organization that has a generic aim, an organizational aim. If you're not talking in reference to such a subject, strictly speaking, you're not talking in the scientific genus, within the terms of the scientific genus or the scientific organization. You're making reference to something that, strictly speaking, is not a scientific term, and you don't want to do that because science does not deal with things that are not essential to the science. St. Thomas talks about in understanding per se predication or this essential relationship. St. Thomas, at the beginning of his Summa Theologia, talks about, not too far into it, about how the subject of science is related to science, an object is related to a habit. That is, it activates it it's a proper object. Per se predication is talking about what properly activates a faculty or a habit. And by proper operation, St. Thomas meant something like color activating the faculty of sight, or sound activating the faculty of hearing. The fact that the person, the fact that what has color that you're seeing might be the clothes of a person, right? rather than the leaves of a tree. Right? The tree and the person are irrelevant to sight, strictly speaking, because what activates the sight is the color. Right? So they're incidental as far as talk goes. They're not part of per se predication when you're talking about sight. Well, with respect to science and scientific talk, what is necessary in relationship to the organizational activity is the universal. Right? It's not a universal idea. Right? Scholastics very often debate this question about the problem of universals, and once again, they can't understand the problem of universals because they don't. They tend to understand this problem as a problem of logic, and they deny the reality of universals. Well, of course, you're going to deny the reality of some sort of a universal substance like a man, but universal relationships, universal causes are real. And like St. Thomas talks about how the sun is predicated as a universal cause of different hot things. And this is the way the scientists. This is the universal of the scientists. When we say that scientists and philosophers have to express their teaching in terms of universals, that science is of the universal. Yes, science is of the universal relationships. It's of the relationship of all the parts of an organization to a common aim, and of cooperating among each other to generate that common aim. So per se predication refers to this. It's necessary talk. Right? And in the case of philosophy and science, this necessary talk involves an operational definition, not simply an organizational definition. The organizational definition meaning you define the organization. It's a fire department, it's a police department, it's a theology department, it's a philosophy department. Okay, we know what the organization is. Now, how do you get it to operate? Well, you need teachers, you need classrooms, you need books. For example, if you're a school, if you're a fire department, well, you might need books and so forth. You might need teachers also, but you also need, most properly speaking, people who are qualified to fight fires, because you've got a different organization. So, in per se predication for St. Thomas, necessary predication, science involves possessing accidents, what Aristotelians would call accidents, which a logician would say are not part of the essence of a thing. Not considered part of its substance, but for St. Thomas and Aristotle, they are part of the substance when you're talking about a scientific subject. Right? Accidents like qualities and quantities are essential elements of science, even though they are by nature accidental. And in truth, they are accidental to an individual, a human being, say, as a human being. Right? They are still intrinsic properties and essential accidents. Qualities and quantities for Aristotle, quality and quantity are essential accidents, intrinsic accidents that exist within a substance that have to be considered as part of a science because it's through these accidents that human beings are able to execute specific acts. That's why people in physics, in classical physics, they study the qualities of things because the qualities influence their movement. And ancient physics, classical physics, studies movement. For example, for St. Thomas, there are three speculative sciences: metaphysics, mathematics, and physics. Now, what distinguishes these speculative sciences, and I've never heard anybody who's a student of St. Thomas talk about this in a way that makes it intelligible completely. Some of them will take the old division that Boethius had, on the basis of forms that are studied. But for Aristotle and St. Thomas, the reason why these accidental characteristics of quality and quantity are essential divisions of a science is because they generate in some way different actions, right? That distribute a kind of unity that is distinctive to the subject of study. The physicist studies qualified being, and has the habit of mind, right, of examining qualities and the operations that are generated from qualities. The mathematician is studying dimensive being that has dimensions, right, and the kind of unity that causes and divides and can be divided up into dimensive multitudes, figured bodies of different shapes, say in geometry. And the metaphysician, right, does not consider physical qualities and does not consider a dimensive quantity as such, other than trying to understand their natures, but is chiefly concerned with the nature of a substance as substance, or with beings that have some immateriality in relationship to them, but also studies quantity and quality in relationship to these. But a kind of spiritual or kind of immaterial quantity and quality, analogously, like the person in ethics will study the greatness of a person's courage. This is once again this principle of virtual quantity, which I said before is somewhat related to our current or contemporary notion of concentration, like you have a greater concentration of liquid, so that it can be applied to a greater multitude of things. You just get a small bottle of a certain liquid, rather than one that's diluted in strength. Why? Because the greatness of strength, right, of this material is able to exercise its influence on a greater multitude of things. So that's a kind of qualitative quantity that is actually the foundation for a greater qualitative distribution of unity within a species, and lies at the foundation. This notion of virtual quantity, with which contemporary thinkers tend to be totally unaware, including students of St. Thomas, is the foundation for the understanding of the nature of species. And this is one of the reasons why pretty much no one today understands the nature of species, including students of St. Thomas, as Etienne Gilson complained about in some essays toward the end of his life. Welcome back to video lecture 5, the second part, or the second lecture of these two approximately 30-minute lectures on St. Thomas's teaching of the One and the Many. And I was discussing before we left how St. Thomas divides a genus into species, and I've been going over again the different ways in which philosophers, scientists talk, and the way in which logicians talk. And I'm going to look down here at my notes again. And about the precise nature of the philosophers, scientists' per se subject of predication, we were talking about how it differs from that of the logicians, and then I'd gotten into this division of speculative science and how this distinction between the philosophers or scientists' understanding of a genus affects the kind of talk about per se predication and what per se predication is, and why logicians can't understand this. What St. Thomas is talking about, because they're not thinking about a subject of science as a generating principle of activity, or an operational organization. And this is what St. Thomas means when he talks about common matter. He says that each science shares a common matter that is the subject of the science. And what he's talking about is an organization. The type of organization that is the subject of a scientific study if you were dividing up different types of, say, business sciences, and considering scientific study of different types of businesses, you'd be talking about different types of business organizations that all share in common being business organizations, or political organizations. They all share in common being political organizations. They all share a generic kind of political unity as political organizations, but there would be more or less perfect ones, depending upon the extent to which they were able to realize the chief aim of politics, say, of generating peace and avoiding war, and in the process of liberating human beings, in developing increasing internal liberty on the part of human beings, because politics, the common matter of politics, is free human beings. These are the proper subjects of rule, not slaves, not serfs. Not in the sense of political organization. A political organization is not an organization of slaves. With respect to the divisions of the sciences, speculative sciences, this common matter, as I pointed out, includes these two intrinsic accidents. That is, if you go through Aristotle's categories of substance, quantity, quality, right? After he finishes with quality, he talks about relation. Thinking of relation chiefly in terms of a difference that causes this substance, this organizational being, to exist outside of itself, and to act outside of itself, right, on other things in place and time. So all of the other categories that he mentions in some way are based upon the category of relation after that. The category of relation can also refer to internal relations, but the way Aristotle chiefly developed his understanding of relation was following this kind of order, and don't want to get into a complicated discussion of relation at the moment. But just to make it intelligible, why he chose these two accidents principally, quantity and quality, because they exist in a thing and they give to it an intrinsic unity. The quality of a thing gives to a thing a kind of qualitative unbreakability, indivisibility. that's different from the kind of indivisibility that it gets from being extended in place. Right? The accident of quality distributes a form internally throughout a unity, that is, a generic unity, depending upon the organization. It distributes a certain perfection of possession, right, of that, in the case of a human being, of that living unity, that is the person, throughout different organic parts that more or less perfectly cooperate and distribute that life throughout the organization, the human body, the human organism. So this accident, it's inside of a human being, right? It's inside the substance, right? It gives to it an internal unity that flows directly from its substance and is a sign of things that are going on, of actions that are taking place within the substance, right? Therefore, it enables us to know internal relationships that are necessary, right? That reflect symptomatic behavior of opposition and cooperation internally, by means of which we can know how the internal causes are working. To take an analogy I like to use a lot of taking teams, like a football team or a baseball team and so forth. There's an organizational activity that goes on with respect to teamwork, where any particular player on a team, in order to understand what it means to belong to an organization, has to know what all of the other members do in some way, at least in a kind of generic understanding. A catcher on a baseball team has to know what a pitcher does, as well as the third baseman, second baseman, the shortstop, second baseman, first baseman, center field, right fielder, left fielder. They have to know the jobs that they're qualified to perform, and that they are expected to perform as team members, as members of that organization. If they don't know, if the third baseman only knows what the first baseman does, doesn't know what the pitcher does, that person has no organizational knowledge, right? The organizational aim has to be distributed through each of those individuals, and it has to be distributed unequally among the different parts, so that you have a team leader on the field, a captain, for example, right? You have aside from a captain, you have someone like a catcher who pretty much negotiates all of the different actions that are going on in a baseball game. And in football, it's even more complicated, right? But the idea that you could just have an isolated individual, like a person in one science, for example, could exist and maintain to possess the whole of science, and nobody else knew anything about science, right? Or could possess no scientific understanding, because this is the whole of science, and nobody else can possess it, because we've got the one method by means of which we know everything. Now, most people would think that there was something mentally unbalanced with a person who would kind of maintain that view, right? But for some reason, they don't seem to think that this is kind of peculiar on the part of contemporary physical scientists. I think it's very peculiar, and I think it's one of the causes for a lot of the contemporary problems that we have, which I'll discuss to some extent, maybe a little bit in other lectures. But I'm just making that point here as a kind of analogy, or as an analogy, to get you to understand why Aristotle took these two principles, quantity and quality, because it's in terms of a thing's unity that we gain scientific understanding. When we know a thing scientifically, we know how it is one. And it cannot be one unless its parts have an essential relationship to its aim. Right? You break the aim, right? You don't have the qualities, the internal qualities, and you don't have the quantitative dimensions to extend the act out of the person or the individual agent, whatever it is that's acting. Then what you're doing is you're lacking an external delivery system, to use language of say, modern business, right? And you're not going to be able to satisfy a customer. It's like having to have a genus that is possessed of species that is lacking these essential accidents is somewhat like having a species capable of engaging in the manufacturing of a product but being unable to deliver it. You can't satisfy the aim. The generic aim is to fulfill the action. The cause imparts to the members of a genus an inclination, just like if it's a living agent, the desire on that part of the cause to act. Well, even inanimate beings have something resembling that desire, an inclination, right? To generate a specific act that helps to fulfill, that does its part to fulfill the organizational action, the cooperative action, like the one firefighter or the other firefighter, the one who's driving the truck, as well as the one who's hooking up the hose, and the one who's extending the ladder. All of them successively in an order of time. Because this is where actions are generated, and succession is consequent, as Aristotle says, upon quantity. Right? And the intensity with which the activities are performed. The weakness or strength of them depend upon quality. So if you don't have these extrinsic actions, you cannot have the causal genus for science, because you don't have the enabling means to fulfill the generic desire that is distributed throughout the members of the species to satisfy the generic aim or the organizational aim. It's like having an organization, as I said, with no delivery system. It's like having a manufacturing business with no UPS trucks or no express delivery. It becomes impossible. Couldn't be done. So Aristotle thought those principles of unity, substantial unity as substance, quantified unity, and qualified unity, right? Which exists within physical things, and the habits of mind that are capable of grasping those different types of unity. The unification of both those constitute a science. And each involves a different act of induction, what we today would call induction, but St. Thomas calls abstraction. The contemporary notion of induction is not adequate to explain even the complexity of induction that engages in mathematics and engages in mathematical physics, because it tends to be historically rooted. It does not make any establish any relationship between the knowing faculties and the act of induction. The way induction occurs depends upon who's inducing. How much you have to focus attention on the behavior of something and what it's doing, and the way you're observing it is not identical in observing things on the basis of ordinary sense experience, or even a sense observation observing the qualities of things. things, where the focus of attention is on, say, visual, whereas the observation might not be auditory. It might be auditory certainly if you're a musician. It's going to be less focus of attention on the visual element. But St. Thomas notices that people engaging in common everyday sense experience and people who are engaged in physics share a common way of inducing, abstracting, where they focus attention on efficient and final causes of the way things behave. That is, on the agent who's acting, right, and the chief aim for which the agent is acting. Because then you're able to grasp the principle of unity. That's the chief way we come to understand the principle of unity. And so he says that the reasoning of the physicist most closely resembles the reasoning of the person of ordinary human experience, because this is the way we get the form, by means of which we understand the unity that's a qualified unity in things, right? And it doesn't involve a lot of complexity to it, and the way we test it, verify truth, is more or less the same by using our external senses, because that's where we got our adequate image from, by means of which and through which we can make judgments in which science concludes. But he says, St. Thomas and Aristotle say that mathematics is chiefly concerned with formal causes and not with efficient and final causes. And this is one of the reasons why people who are mathematicians tend to think, well, science has nothing to do with formal or final, with efficient or final causes, because it's only concerned with formal causes. Well, the reason for that is the mathematician is chiefly concerned with dimensive organization, with bodies that are quantified and different ways of putting and taking apart those bodies according to principles of spatial relation and numbering. So the mathematician, in other words, is getting the form, getting the principle of unity that the mathematician is chiefly interested in a way, according to a kind of induction, that the physicist is not interested in, because the mathematician, by common everyday experience, already, has those skills. So there's a kind of activity that goes on in the imagination of a mathematician that requires mathematical models, ways of imagining that you cannot adequately generate from just the external senses, because these relationships that hold dimensive parts together, like figured bodies, require memory. They require knowing a continuum, sensing it in that kind of a fashion, and you can't do that with the external senses. This requires internal sense activity of imagination and memory that transcend the capacity, the capability of the external senses. So St. Thomas says that the abstraction in which the mathematician engages, or the induction in which the mathematician engages, abstracts from what he calls sensible matter, that is the qualified material that interests and motion that interests the physicist. Today we have mathematical physics, which combine both activities, but still, strictly speaking, the mathematician doesn't understand or focus attention on motion. Can't comprehend the motion from the standpoint of the method of induction of the mathematician. That person, like Galileo recognized in his two New World systems, in coming up with an understanding of the nature of stress, and the way it influences the understanding of building ships, had to look to the shipbuilders in Venice who had the common experience of the physicist and recognized that mathematical principles could not explain the material inclination to resist and to be receptive to taking movement. The mathematical principles, the geometrical principles didn't work. And he couldn't get that, he didn't get that because of his understanding of mathematics. He got that because of his understanding of principles of physics, which were based upon classical physics. Metaphysicians, okay, so metaphysicians have their own interest in types of organizations that they study. They're not interested in this type of dimensive body, the common matter of the mathematician. They are not interested in the physical changes and organizations that generate different types of physical change. Living things, psychological beings. For Aristotle, ancient physics would consider psychology, for example, as as part of physics, because of the fact that of the emotions moving the body, and it can be properly be studied in that kind of a way. From that, as he would put it, or St. Thomas would put it, that from that formal aspect, because they're looking at it from a consideration of this different habit that's focusing attention on a different kind of organizational unity in the thing. But so each of them is taking a kind of unity, right? Mathematics takes a kind of unity. It studies it as an organization. It's interested in the parts that constitute that unity. The physicist does that, and the metaphysician basically studies all organizations. This is why metaphysics is the queen of the sciences. Because it's not interested simply in one type of organization or another type of organization and the causes that are involved in, say, generating circles or squares or rectangles or cubes and so on. Straight lines, taking straight lines to measure motion, right? And predict how projectile motions are going to occur in mathematical physics. But the metaphysician is interested in the nature of all organizations, and because each science in a way studies leadership principles, how to lead different activities of mind and emotion and so forth, to be able to draw right conclusions. Metaphysics is the highest science of leadership. It studies the principles of leadership, the principles of organizational truth in all organizations. And this is why a mastery of understanding of metaphysics and its principles and the way these influence the development of all organizations. If a person already is a leader, especially, or has a skill, tends to magnify a person's ability to organize and to lead. This accounts for the threefold division of the sciences, the speculative sciences in Aristotle and St. Thomas, I have a crucial distinction to recall about the precise difference between the way of predicating the term substance and how the logician uses this in the philosopher. And I've mentioned this already, or the scientist, that from the standpoint of the way that Aristotle and St. Thomas talk about the subject of a science, which they call a substance. Substance is the subject of all science. That makes no sense to an Aristotelian logician who thinks of substance simply as the essential elements or the essential principles of form and matter, right? That are the chief focus of attention of predication, right? That which you chiefly talk about, and secondarily the accidents. Those accidents are just not necessary for for this type of way of using principles as principles of talk or professional speech. But they are crucial to understand why Aristotle says and why St. Thomas says that all science is a study of substance, and why the knowledge of quantity, according to Aristotle, is the most crucial of the accidental characteristics by means of which to understand and to know substance. Aristotle meaning both dimensive quantity and this more primitive understanding of quantity that he has, virtual quantity, which I'm going to go into in more detail in a future lecture.